Most snake plant owners either repot too soon and slow the plant down, or wait too long and quietly stress it into poor growth. The answer is not as simple as roots at the edge of the pot. Knowing exactly when to act and when to leave it alone is what separates a thriving snake plant from one that struggles for no obvious reason. Welcome to Plant Ear Lab, where smart growers discover plant ideas that actually make sense. Snake plants are one of the most forgiving plants you can grow, but repotting them is one area where even experienced growers regularly make the wrong call. The most common mistake is treating a root-bound snake plant the same way you would treat any other crowded plant. That logic does not apply here. Snake plants have a very different relationship with their roots than most houseplants do. And understanding that difference is what this video is entirely about. Stay with us, because later in this video we will cover one specific situation where most growers automatically reach for a bigger pot and where the smarter, more practical decision is actually something else entirely. Here is the framework most growers are missing. When people see roots circling the bottom of a pot, pushing through drainage holes, or pressing against the sides of a container, the automatic reaction is to repot immediately. That reaction makes sense for many plants. But snake plants are different. They are naturally slow growers that often perform better when their roots have less open space around them, not more. A snake plant that looks crowded at the roots is not always a snake plant in trouble. In many cases, it is a snake plant that is settled, stable, and producing exactly the kind of growth pattern it prefers. The real question is never just whether the roots look full. The real question is whether the plant is showing signs that the current pot is actually limiting its health. Root presence alone is not the answer. Root impact on plant performance is what you should be reading. That is the framework this video is built around. And once you understand it, you will stop second-guessing your snake plant every time you spot a root near the edge of the pot. Root-bound simply means the roots of a plant have filled the available space inside its container. For many fast-growing, moisture-loving plants, that condition leads quickly to stress because the roots cannot expand to support the plant's water and nutrient needs. But snake plants, known botanically as Dracaena trifasciata, have a very different root behavior. Their roots are thick, fleshy, and rhizomatous. They store water and energy inside the root structure itself, which means a crowded root system is not necessarily a depleted one. Snake plants evolved in dry, rocky, and nutrient-limited environments. In those conditions, a compact root zone was not a disadvantage. It was normal. The plant adapted to make the most of limited soil space rather than depending on wide root spread for survival. This history matters because it directly explains why snake plants in tight pots often look and grow better than snake plants given too much open soil at once. When a snake plant sits in a pot that is too large for its current root volume, the excess soil holds moisture that the roots cannot use quickly enough. That lingering moisture around an underused root zone is one of the most common causes of root rot in snake plants. The pot was too big, not too small. So when you see a snake plant with roots filling its container, what you are often seeing is a plant that has simply reached a natural, comfortable fit with its growing space. The roots are present, organized, and functioning. That is not the same as a plant that is suffering. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward making a smarter repotting decision every single time. There are specific situations where leaving a root-bound snake plant alone is the right and practical decision. The first is when the plant is still producing new leaves at a normal pace. Snake plants are not fast growers under any condition. But if you are seeing new growth emerging from the center or from the base of the plant at a reasonable rate, the root system is clearly managing. That is not a plant asking for more space. That is a plant telling you it is fine where it is. The second situation is when the soil is still draining well after watering. If water moves through the pot and out of the drainage hole without pooling on the surface or sitting for excessive periods, the root and soil relationship is still functional. A truly exhausted root-bound plant often shows the opposite. Water either rushes straight through without being absorbed, or the surface stays wet longer than expected because the root mass has displaced most of the workable soil. The third situation is when the plant looks stable in color and structure. Firm, upright, evenly colored leaves without yellowing edges or soft spots at the base are signs that the root system is supporting the plant adequately. The fourth situation worth noting is season. If your snake plant is currently in its slower growing season, repotting during that period adds unnecessary stress without much benefit. Leaving it until active growth resumes is usually the more practical choice. In all of these situations, the correct decision is to leave the plant alone, continue your normal care routine, and monitor rather than intervene. Knowing when to leave a snake plant alone is important, but knowing when root-bound has crossed into a real problem is equally important. There are clear signals worth understanding. The first is visible structural distortion of the container. When roots are pressing outward with enough force to crack a plastic nursery pot or visibly bulge the sides of a softer container, the root mass has likely grown beyond what that container can support comfortably. This is not just an aesthetic issue. The compressed root zone at that stage can make it harder for water to distribute evenly through the soil, and the roots themselves can begin pushing against each other in ways that damage the more delicate feeding roots. The second signal is a noticeable and sustained slowdown in new growth during the active growing season. If your snake plant has produced no new leaves across an entire growing season, and conditions like light, watering, and temperature have been consistent, the root environment may be limiting the plant's ability to support new growth. The third signal is soil that dries out unusually fast after every watering. When roots have displaced nearly all of the soil in a container, there is very little growing medium left to hold moisture. The plant needs water more frequently than it should, and that cycle becomes harder to manage over time. The fourth signal is when you tip the plant out and find a dense, tightly matted root ball with almost no loose soil remaining inside the root structure. If the roots have consumed the usable soil volume and the growing medium is essentially gone, the pot has been outgrown. These signals, especially when more than one appears at the same time, are the genuine indicators that repotting is now the practical and correct decision. When repotting is the right decision, doing it correctly matters as much as the decision itself. The first and most important rule is pot size. Going up by one size, typically around 5 centimeters or 2 inches wider than the current container, is the standard and practical approach. Going too large in one step is one of the most common repotting mistakes with snake plants. A pot that is significantly bigger than the current root ball gives the roots too much open, moist soil to navigate, and that increases the risk of root rot rather than reducing stress. One size up keeps the root zone stable while giving just enough room for natural expansion. The second consideration is soil mix. Snake plants do best in a well-draining mix. A standard potting soil cut with perlite, coarse sand, or a dedicated succulent and cactus mix works well in most situations. The goal is a medium that holds some moisture but releases excess water quickly and does not stay wet for extended periods. Dense, moisture-retaining soils are consistently one of the weaker choices for this plant. The third consideration is timing. Repotting during active growth, typically spring through early summer in most climates, gives the plant the best conditions for recovery and new root establishment. Repotting in late autumn or winter is generally harder on the plant because growth is slowed and the root system takes longer to settle into the new space. After repotting, water the plant moderately and place it back in its usual light conditions. Hold back on any fertilizer for at least 4 to 6 weeks to avoid stressing the recover. This is the situation I mentioned earlier in the video, the one where most growers automatically reach for a bigger pot, and where the smarter decision is actually something different. When a snake plant has become genuinely root-bound and the pot has a healthy cluster of offsets, or pups, growing alongside the main plant, the most practical option in many cases is not to move everything into a larger container. It is to divide the plant instead. Division means separating the established pups from the parent plant and potting each section individually. This gives you multiple plants, each starting fresh in a right-sized container with good soil volume around their roots, rather than one increasingly crowded plant in a progressively larger pot that can become harder to manage over time. From a practical standpoint, division offers clear advantages. Each divided section establishes its own root system quickly because snake plant rhizomes are naturally resilient and recover well from careful separation. The parent plant, now with fewer competing offsets sharing the same root zone, often responds with stronger and more focused new growth. And for anyone growing snake plants with a nursery or plant selling angle in mind, division is also the most straightforward way to multiply your stock. Without additional cost, the process is not complicated. Allow the soil to dry out moderately before starting. Remove the plant from its container carefully. Separate the pup clusters from the parent rhizome using a clean, sharp tool. Allow the cut surfaces to dry briefly before potting. Then plant each section in a correctly sized container with well-draining mix. Division is not always the right answer, but when a snake plant is genuinely crowded and producing multiple offsets, it is consistently one of the most practical and rewarding decisions a grower can make. Let us bring this together clearly. Snake plants are not standard houseplants when it comes to root density. They are slow-growing, storage-rooted, drought-adapted plants that genuinely prefer a snug root environment over excess open soil. That single fact changes the entire repotting conversation for this plant. A root-bound snake plant is not automatically a plant in trouble. It is often a plant that is well settled and functioning exactly as it should. The decision to repot should always be based on plant performance signals, not just on whether roots are visible at the edge of a pot. If the plant is growing, draining well, and holding stable color and structure, leave it alone. That is the correct and practical decision. If the plant is showing sustained growth slowdown during active season, soil that dries out unusually fast, visible container distortion, or a root ball that has consumed nearly all usable soil, those are the real signals that a new container is now the right move. When you do repot, keep the pot size increase modest, use a well-draining soil mix, and time it for the active growing season when possible. And when your snake plant is genuinely crowded but also producing healthy offsets, consider division before you consider simply going bigger. Division often gives you a better long-term result. Multiple healthy plants, each in a right-sized space, rather than one increasingly complex root situation in an ever larger pot. The growers who get the most from snake plants over time are not the ones who repot most often. They are the ones who read the plant accurately, act when the plant actually needs it, and leave it alone when it does not. That patience, paired with the right practical knowledge, is what makes the difference. If this video helped you think about your snake plant differently, give it a like. It helps more growers find this kind of practical plant content. If you are currently deciding whether to repot your snake plant or leave it, drop a comment below and tell us what you are seeing. We would be glad to help you read the signs. And if you want more practical, research-grounded plant ideas that actually make sense for real growers, subscribe to Plantier Lab. New ideas are on the way, and they are worth staying for.